Overshadowed, rising above my sister's golden glow. Growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I always believed families were supposed to be a source of love, encouragement, and fairness. My family, however, was anything but fair. From as far back as I can remember, my younger sister, Emma, was treated like royalty, while I was little more than an afterthought. It started small, almost unnoticeable when we were kids. Emma had a bubbly personality, while I was quieter, preferring books and puzzles to the attention-seeking antics Emma mastered so well. I didn't mind at first. Being in her shadow was easier than competing for the spotlight. But as we grew older, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. When Emma wanted a puppy, my parents scrambled to find the perfect golden retriever, despite not letting me keep the stray cat I had rescued weeks earlier. At school, my grades were consistently excellent, yet my parents would barely glance at my report cards. Emma, on the other hand, was showered with praise for the smallest achievements, like finishing her math homework on time. The breaking point high school was where it truly became unbearable. I had dreams of becoming a writer, and I spent countless hours crafting essays and entering competitions. I won several awards, but my parents barely acknowledged them. When Emma got a participation ribbon in her school art show, they hung it on the fridge and invited the neighbors over to celebrate. My teenage years were a constant struggle for recognition. I worked part-time jobs to save up for college, knowing my parents were unlikely to help. Meanwhile, they handed Emma money for every whim: a new phone, designer clothes, even a car for her 16th birthday. Emma's younger, my mother always said dismissively when I protested. She needs more help. When I finally graduated high school with honors, I was excited about the future. I had been accepted into a prestigious university, but my parents refused to help with tuition. "We can't afford it," my father said. A week later, they paid Emma's private school fees in full. Adulthood and distance college was a struggle. I worked 2 jobs and took out loans to cover my expenses, but I was determined to make it on my own. Emma, meanwhile, continued to live at home, dropping out of college after a year and relying on my parents for everything. By the time I graduated, I had little contact with my family. I visited occasionally, but every visit was a reminder of how little I mattered to them. Emma's life was a mess. She drifted from one job to another, accumulating debt and drama. My parents always bailed her out, even mortgaging their house to cover her expenses. I couldn't understand their blind devotion. When I bought my first apartment, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want them to belittle my accomplishment. But somehow, Emma found out and mentioned it during a family dinner. "Must be nice to have money," my mother said, her tone icy. "Some of us have real responsibilities." I left the table without a word, vowing never to return. The catalyst years passed, and I built a successful career in marketing. I traveled the world, made friends who became like family, and even started my own consulting firm. But no matter how much I achieved, a part of me still longed for my parents' approval. The final straw came when Emma announced her engagement. My parents insisted on paying for her wedding, sparing no expense. When I asked why they couldn't have helped with my college tuition or my small, quiet wedding years earlier, my mother's response cut me deeply. "You've always been so independent. We knew you didn't need us." That night, I cried for hours. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. For years, I had swallowed my anger, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, I was done being overlooked. The plan: I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I decided to show my parents once and for all what they had lost by favoring Emma. I started by sending them updates about my life: promotions, awards, milestones. I made sure they knew about every success. At first, their responses were lukewarm, but as my accomplishments grew, so did their interest. Emma, on the other hand, was struggling. Her marriage fell apart, and her financial irresponsibility finally caught up with her. My parents, now in their late 60s, were drowning in debt from years of bailing her out. One day I received a call from my mother. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice hesitant, "we need your help. Emma's in trouble again, and we don't know what to do." For the first time, I had the power in our relationship. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, "but I can't help. I've spent my entire life being second to Emma, and I won't put myself in that position again. My mother began to cry, but I held my ground. The revelation. A few months later, my parents reached out again, this time with an apology. They admitted they had been unfair to me and asked if we could meet. When we sat down together, I let years of resentment pour out. I told them how much their favoritism had hurt me, how it had shaped my life and my relationships. My father looked ashamed, and my mother wept openly. "We didn't realize," she said. "We thought we were helping Emma, but we see now how much we hurt you. Can you ever forgive us?" Moving forward. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and it didn't come overnight. But I decided to let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. I set boundaries with my parents, refusing to let them take advantage of me, but I allowed them back into my life on my terms. As for Emma, she remained the golden child in their eyes, but I no longer cared. I had built a life I was proud of, a life that didn't depend on their validation. In the end, I realized that the best revenge wasn't hurting them or exposing their flaws. It was living well and finding peace within myself. Growing up in a family where favoritism reigned, I was always the forgotten child overshadowed by my younger sister, the golden child. From overlooked achievements to constant sacrifices, my life was shaped by their indifference and her endless demands. But when the weight of their choices pushed me to the breaking point, I decided to take control of my destiny. This is the story of how I reclaimed my self-worth, broke free from a lifetime of neglect, and found strength in the face of injustice. A journey of resilience, self-discovery, and the power of finally saying, enough.